All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Ian Tian. I'm a vice president at the Chinese Institute of Engineers, Seattle, and we're very happy to have everyone here. So for the members, thanks for coming, and for people who are, I guess, prospective members or interested in learning more about the Chinese Institute of Engineers, we're a organization, a local chapter of a national foundation that's dedicated towards promoting and recognizing excellence in the science, technology, engineering, and education fields. And that's what we do in the local community. We're very happy to have the involvement of local companies working with us in our efforts. So some of the events we do include social events like picnics and outings, as well as scholastic events. We have scholarship awards every year, as well as a youth math and science contest that we run every year. This year it's happening November 4th. And there's information about it on our website, cie-usa.org. We have a number of board members here today. I'd like to just have them raise their hands. So if they're board members, you will have any questions about CIE or interested more in the organization, they're here to talk to you about it. So this event, we're very happy to have Google, very grateful to Google for hosting this with us. Our seminar series has included this year CEOs from many local startups. We've had the former editor of PC Magazine. We've had PhDs talking about investment finance. And it's been a really great series, and we're very, very happy to be here at Google today. Today's talk has a lot to do with what CIE is one of the benefits the CIE organization has really tried to bring to the community, which is being able to bring people together across cultures, whether that's the Asian cultures, the many different cultures in Asia, the American cultures from different disciplines, whether it's engineering or government or finance, and also cultures that go across different companies. So it's really these events that we're very, very glad, and it's a pleasure to host these. So today we've got quite an impressive speaker. Mr. Chee is a graduate of MIT, and he's worked in the U.S., he's worked in India, he's worked in China, and he's really had a remarkable career in leadership. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Chee.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. It's great to see everyone here. My training is in engineering. I started off as a developer, and I never predicted that my career would take me where I am. I want to talk about the Asian values and how it fits in American cultures, because I'm very passionate about that. But it's a lot from my personal experiences. So I hope that this is relevant to you, and it could bring you a lot of thought about how you operate with your teams and also your careers. So help me understand. Could you raise your hand if you grew up, either were born or moved to the US before the age of 10? Oh, wow, not very many. How many people moved here around college age or after college? Oh, wow. OK, quite a lot. And how many people here have, to the best of their knowledge, no Asian blood in them whatsoever? Cool. Well, it's fine. Welcome to your new minority. You know. It's great to be here, and it's great to have all you guys here. Give you an idea for my background. I was born in Malaysia, born in Kuala Lumpur. Lived in Malaysia, Penang, for 3 years. And then I moved to the US. When I was about 3.5, 4 years old, I only spoke Hokkien. I did not speak any English. And I moved to the US. And then my parents realized that in a year and a half, I would have to attend English school, because it was in South Carolina. And I think I was maybe the only Chinese person in South Carolina at that time. I think there probably were 3 others. I think they were my mom, dad, and my sister. So they realized that I had to learn how to speak English very quickly. So when I was 3 years old, they stopped speaking Hokkien to me. They only spoke English to me. And so I only spoke English for the next many years. When I was about 10 or 11, my parents thought, wow, he's so American. He speaks no Chinese. So they started to speak Chinese again to me. But by that time, I was lost. So from when I was 10 up, I could understand Chinese, but I couldn't speak it. But then my parents still, they talked to me in Chinese, and I answered in English. Talk to me in Chinese, I answered in English. Except for when I was in trouble. When I was in trouble, they spoke to me in English to make sure I understood. So that's a little my background. And for a long time, they said, you're very, very American. And I kind of believed that. And in many ways, it's very true. But then also in many ways, I am very Asian in my core, in the core values that I have. I don't know biology and psychology well enough to know whether those parts of me that are Asian are because of nature, that I was born with it, or whether they were nurtured because my parents, even though they spoke English to me, we had a very Chinese values household. So I don't know which that is, and at some level it doesn't matter. And I imagine, especially for those who moved to the US after you were in college, the situation is probably very similar for you. So I grew up in South Carolina, Kentucky, the Deep South. My high school and my grade school had only 3 Asians in them: myself, my sister, and a friend of mine. So that's the environment. There's no kidding. So there were 3 Asians in my high school and grade school. We stood out a lot. It was quite hard, and especially in the South, especially when I was growing up, there's a lot of prejudice. It's called a lot of names. It kind of forced me to retreat sometimes and to question whether I liked being Chinese. Like, would I rather just be white, American, like everyone else in that school? So it brought a lot of questions, and it was quite difficult. But then I went to college. I went to MIT. And when I went to MIT, I don't know what the percentage is now, but we were 30% Asian. 30% Asian. And when I say Asian for that category, it was 30% Asian, not including India. Not including India. Very, very high percentage. So it's like a different world, you know? So it was quite eye-opening. I enjoyed it very much. I got my master's and my bachelor's at MIT. And then I went to Microsoft out of college. And Microsoft in this area, also a lot of Chinese. So it was great. And I didn't feel out of place. So it was great experience there. I started off as a engineer, a software developer on Windows 95. I wrote the taskbar. So if you guys have used the taskbar and you have bugs in there, they're my fault. And then I became a development lead on Internet Explorer. And that was quite a change. I did not expect to ever become a manager. I thought I was always be an engineer. But I became a manager, and I was a dev lead, and I learned quite a lot. And then I became a dev manager. And as a dev manager, most of what you do is to manage people. And you write a little bit of code, but most of what you do is really to manage people. And then I became a product unit manager. And at Microsoft, if you're not familiar, a product unit manager is someone who starts to manage a business. And you don't have engineers reporting to you, but you also have the program management team. And you have the test team. And those 3 categories of people are often very, very different from each other. Engineers, I consider engineers logical to an extreme. And program managers, their job is to control the product, to direct the team. So I think of program managers as a little bit of a control freak. So they have a lot more ego in stake of what's going on. And then the test team, they have great religion. They are just the zealots for quality, and they hold the bar high. And to lead these 3 very diverse set of people was very eye-opening. I'll talk about that more. Became a general manager for Windows Mobile. So I ran the mobile devices team that built smartphone and Pocket PC. And then I moved over from there after 7 years working on mobile devices I moved over to the Xbox organization and worked on games for a little while. And then finally this year, I joined Google, and I'm an engineering director at Google. So I run several of the projects here, focusing on the client projects. And I also run the Kirkland China team, which is a team that is based in Kirkland, but we work on products that will advantage and help our efforts in China. So that's a little bit of my background. When I was an engineer, it was the easiest thing for me at that point, because I could write code and I could be very measurable about whether it was doing well or not. It's very scientific. If it worked, I knew it. If it didn't work, it crashed. Things were just very concrete. Things were very logical. When I went into a meeting and had a disagreement with somebody, we would argue about it based on the logic. There was no ego involved. We could say which is the best design. And sometimes it's subjective, but we understood and we talked on a very engineering basis. When I became a dev lead and I managed people, things got very weird at first, because I would talk about the logic of something. And someone would come in and they would talk to me, and what they were really concerned about wasn't the logic, whether right or wrong. Sometimes it was about how they felt. Like when they made a mistake and they felt really bad, or when they were arguing with someone else and there's sort of more competition or emotion built into that. Like as an engineer, I would just want to talk about, okay, well, who was right? What was the right decision? And even if the person was wrong in the decision, they still had to be validated. And I really didn't understand that. And I would go home to my wife, and my wife would say, duh, you got to care about what they think. You got to care about what they feel. You got to care about their emotion. But that wasn't something I was trained for. When I became a development manager, and my team grew to 70 engineers, so I was a manager of 70 developers, I would have to get up and talk to a group of people like this. It was something I was very uncomfortable with. I never learned how to talk to a group of people. So that was a huge learning experience. And I dare say that I was pretty bad at it initially. As a product unit manager, when you have to talk then to a diverse set of people, they're not all engineers. They think about different things. They have different priorities. They have different levels of knowledge. So I couldn't talk just purely on a technical basis, because if I just talked technically, a lot of people didn't understand what in the world I was saying. They had different priorities. So as I talked to the developers, they want to know about like what the new great things are. What are we going to do in the future? But in that group, they also had testers, and they want to talk about what the problems are and how we're going to fix the problems and what's going on, what's wrong. And a lot of the engineers don't want to talk about what's wrong and how to look backwards. They want to think about how you look forwards. And then the program managers want to be inspired and want to know how they're going to conquer the world, right? So, but they're all in one group, and we have to talk to them all. And I really had a lot of trouble with that. Around that time, I had a great mentor, and I attended a class that was instrumental in shaping how I thought about leadership and how it helped me understand myself better. And I think that one class, that one experience is sort of the central focus for what I'll talk about today. Then I moved over to Google, and it's what I find at Google is the culture may be very different. The people in many ways are different. The way the company operates is different, but the principles of leadership remain the same. And the skills that I learned as I was going through my Microsoft time are very applicable to what I'm doing here at Google now. So, are we a minority? In the consensus data for the year 2000, there were 11.8 million Asians, including Indian, in the US. That's not a lot. So in this office in Google, we have about 300 engineers. So that should be about 11, 12 engineers of Asian descent in Google. We have a little bit more than 11 or 12 Asians here. As I said in my college, there were about 30% Asian. We are dramatically overrepresented in a lot of these forums, right? But as you look to executive positions, as you look to, if you're in an engineering organization, if you look to the vice presidents, the general managers of your organizations, we are dramatically underrepresented. Not only, if you look at our demographic in engineering, individual contributors and first level managers, we may have 20%, 30% of the population, or 10%, something like that. But when you go up, we're in the single digits. And in many companies, there aren't Oriental leaders in rather large companies. Why is that? Are we not good at that? Are we incapable of leading? At one point, I really questioned that. But what I come to believe is that in the American culture, there are some things about how Asians develop via nurture or via nature that the American culture does not know how to appreciate. And that's neither good or bad. I'm not making a value judgment about that. I think that is our job, if we want to succeed and we want to promote more representation, is simply to accept it, to learn how to deal with that, and at the same time learn how to preserve the core of who we are. Understand what makes up the essence of who we are, and what are things that are not our essence, but simply manifestations. So, for example, at the core, like, I am who I am, and I might or might not be good at tennis. And for some reason, I might need to become good at tennis. So I might learn to become good at tennis. Does that change fundamentally who I am? Or does it just mean that I am who I am, but I can now play tennis, right? So that understanding the environment that we're in, recognizing it, accepting it, and then learning the skills that we need to learn in order to really thrive and succeed in this environment. And that's the essence of what I believe we have to do. And I think it's very, very possible, by and large. Right? Now, every situation is different. Every individual is different. So I will talk about things in generalizations. There's some data, there's some psychology studies that I can quote that will make this will confirm this generalization, but I do recognize that it is not exactly true for everybody. For example, I will make a generalization that, by and large, Asians are more introverted than Americans. That is not to say that there aren't very extroverted Asians, and that is not to say that there are very introverted Americans. But the studies have shown that, a recent one I was reading was there are 70% of Asians and Europeans, actually, are introverted, whereas less than 50% of Americans are introverted. And that has a dramatic impact upon how you show up in this American culture. And to even further, there are some studies that show that the American corporate culture does not value and respect introverts. So how does that affect your ability to lead, right? Now that is a generalization, because only 70%, right? There's the 30% that's not. But I will talk in generalizations. So when we go out and we think about our skills and who we are, there are some things like that we cannot change, or will take a very long time for us to change. Right? Some of these things can change. But at the same time, there are skill sets that we can learn much more rapidly and still succeed where we want to succeed. So for me, the changing event was this course I took that included 360 feedback, where my manager, my directs, my peers, customers, I got feedback from about 12 different key people who work with me on a daily basis, and gave me input about what they perceived about me, what they thought my strengths were, what they thought my weaknesses were, in a very quantified way. And I also took a Myers-Briggs test. How many people know Myers-Briggs? Ah, very good. So Myers-Briggs is this personality test that tells you a little bit about your disposition. I found it very, very insightful. I hadn't heard about it till then. So this is my score. On the scale, so there's a scale for each of these categories. They give you a letter for it. But the first scale is I versus E, introvert versus extrovert. Introvert versus extrovert. If you see a 0%, that means you're completely borderline. For me, I was 100% over on the introvert side. 100%. Every question they asked, how do you prefer to interact? Everyone was on a one-to-one basis. I don't like standing up and speaking in front of, say, more than 2 or 3, 4 or 5 people. So you can imagine that this audience is a little bit uncomfortable for me. S, so sensing. This is about how do I get data? How do I evaluate data? Do I go for the facts? Do I go and seek out the actual numbers? Or do I take a little bit of numbers and use my intuition? So I and many engineers really drive for the pure data. They don't like as much intuition. They want to understand the actual final facts, and they want to base the decision off the facts. The next one is I think that one's thinking versus sensing. Thank you. So thinking versus sensing is around how do you make a decision? Do you look at the overall data and you make your decision based on the data, and then you look at the people involved, and maybe you make an exception for the people involved, or do you look at the people first and you kind of sense this is what the people would do and how the people will guide you, and then you look at and make sure it confirms with the data and the logic. Like, which side do you approach it from? Do you approach it from the data side and then try to take account for the people, or you approach it from the people side and account for the data? And the last one, I'm kind of in the middle for. So this is perceiving versus judging. So I won't talk a lot about that because for me, that hasn't had a big impact on my leadership that I've seen yet. But I'll talk really primarily around the first two. So as an introvert, there are two things in leadership forums that I had a hard time doing. I had a horrible time speaking in front of a group of people. Horrible, horrible time. And the second thing that I had a hard time doing was when you're in the moment, in a meeting, and you have a hot debate on, I would stop and I would want to think and quietly think about the situation, size the whole thing, and then come back in an hour or two after the meeting with what I thought about it. And in that meeting, people are going back and forth, and they're arguing back and forth, and okay, at the end they'll say, okay, we decided, and I haven't said a word. I remember my manager on one of my reviews, he wrote down on it. My manager was Kevin Shields. I don't know if you guys know him. He's a good manager. But he wrote down on my review, Chee needs to open his mouth more in meetings, even at the risk of sticking his foot in it. So, but this is directly related to my predisposition for being introvert. Logic to extreme. This one was a huge hurdle for me around being a good manager, because when someone came to me with a problem, I would dive in to try to solve that problem, when really I needed to think about what was troubling that individual. Was it actually solving the problem? Maybe she already had the problem, and what he really needed to do was have someone to vent with, or say, hey, okay, maybe the real issue is a relationship problem with you or a partner, or maybe the issue is you're not comfortable with me. That there's some issue that you don't like how we interact, and that's not a logic problem. Like debugging a human is much harder than debugging a computer. But this was something that I was not used to. And I would just dive in and say, okay, give me the facts. This is what we should do. And I would drive in to solve that issue. So these were the things that really impeded me. But from the Myers-Briggs test, the key lessons, the key lesson that I learned from that was just because I am predisposed for this, for one thing or another, does not mean that I can't become good at it. Even though I hate standing in front of a group of 50, 60, 100 people and speaking, it doesn't mean I can't become better at it. And my message to you is if you look at the things that hold Asians back, if you look at things that hold you back, whether or not you're an Asian or not, it doesn't matter who you are, we all have predispositions for certain things they're good at or not good at. We need to understand that. We need to understand what we can be good at, what we are prevented from being good at. Like, if I want to play tennis, but really I have no coordination whatsoever, I probably won't become good at tennis. Understand what we are predisposed for and what we are incapable of doing, and then address those skills issues. On the flip side, there are some things which you can become good at, but then do change the core of who you are. For those things, you should stick very, very closely to your values and not change those. So for example, there have been forums where I've been in where I observed that people got ahead by backstabbing each other. That was against my values. I might have be able to become good at backstabbing. Maybe I could. But it was against the core value of who I was. And so that is something that I am not willing to change. I don't think that you should change that core value. However, I can and should learn to become a better speaker if the path I want to take is one that requires that. Right? So that's the key thing. So the way I broke it down is there's values, and those are the core things of who you really are, the things that you must preserve in order for you to really live with yourself. Because if I change this value, then I might not like who I am. If I become someone who is a backstabber, for example, then I won't like who I am anymore. If I change my ability to speak in front of a crowd, if I change my ability to talk with someone on an emotional basis as opposed to just purely a technical basis, that doesn't change my value, it just changes my skill. I'm still perfectly happy with who I am. Understand what your values are. Understand what you're predisposed for, what you have a tendency to be good at, to be not good at, to be comfortable with. Really, that's the key thing. Your predisposition tells you what you are comfortable with. Then understand the skills behind that. Develop those skills. And finally, the last one is about execution. And the key thing I learned from this is execution is about mental will and energy. Some people, extroverts, for example, I'll harp on introverts and extroverts because that was the most critical thing for me. The thing I learned about extroverts were when they stand in front of a group like this and they talk, at the end of the period, the extrovert has a ton of energy. They get energy from speaking in front of everybody. As an introvert, at the end of speaking with you, I will be exhausted. I will be completely exhausted. My flow goes the other way around. It has no comment about whether I can do this or not. It just has a comment about the energy that I will put in to do this. Right? So for the skills, when you align your values and you understand your disposition and you develop the skill that you are predisposed against, when you execute upon it, you may feel exhausted, but that's okay. That doesn't harm you. Right? Doesn't say that you will do a bad job. It just means that you've got to put the effort in. So this is the center of what I've learned for me and what's been the most influential thing for me around developing my leadership ability. For values, so I'll go through this example for me. For values, everyone has a lot of values, but the ones that were most relevant for me as I analyze what's important for me for leadership were these three things. Transparency. I believe very strongly that I should be transparent to my team, to my peers, and to my manager. Right? I believe very strongly that 99% of all management problems, when someone is unhappy about their management situation, about the manager and the situation above them, is because of insufficient transparency. That's a fundamental belief that I hold. I might be wrong on it, but that's what I believe, and that's how I will lead. Second is teamwork. I believe very strongly in that the strength of an engineering team comes from teamwork. this has a lot of implications. When I interview an individual, and they're able to solve NP complete, and they're able to do amazing things, but when I ask them questions about how they interact with other people, if they say, oh yeah, I solved this person and I had to carry the weight for the rest of my team, yeah, they weren't really carrying the weight, but I championed them through. And they very well might have. I will tend not to hire that individual. That same person, that same situation, if that person says, yeah, we faced troubles, I did XYZ things. Everyone pitched in. Some people were stronger than others, but everyone did their best. That teamwork, that is what I will go after, right? So it also has other implications. When I work with partners, I believe is my duty, and not only from an altruistic point of view, but also because it will end up benefiting me and my team, that it is my job to give credit where credit is due. If a teammate does a great job, then I absolutely will give all credit to them. Not even like their fair share. Oh yeah, he did 50, I did 50. If they did a great job, they did a great job. If someone in my team did a great job, I will bubble that up to my manager. And I won't say like, oh yeah, we did it. I'll say, yes, that person shined, right? The push to give credit where credit is due is fundamental for me in what good teamwork is. And I lead by that. And when I see people not doing that in my team, I call them on it. I hold them accountable to it. And that's how I lead. And fairness. Fairness does not mean equal. Fairness means people get what they deserve. People who are not performing well should be held accountable, should be held strongly accountable. And people who are doing well should be rewarded. Right? So I lead very strongly by these three values. And whatever I do, the skills I need to gain or not gain, I won't change these. My predisposition, though, is around introvert and logic. I have a hard time dealing with things that are not logical. I have a very, very hard time dealing with it. Sometimes we will make decisions in my team that are because of someone's gut feeling. I have a really hard time with that. Sometimes there are a bunch of people in the team that together they say, yeah, we want to go that way, and we're not sure if it's the right thing or not, and all the data, in fact, kind of points us the other way, but we want to make this bet. I have a hard time with that. But I believe in the teamwork, and if the team wants to do that, then I will say, and I'm pretty transparent about this, I'm not sure that this is the right thing, but if you all want to do that, then that's where we will go. And in the end of the day, if it is wrong, I will absolutely not say I told you so, because that's not strong teamwork. At the point where I said, yes, we will go there, I am fully behind it, even though it is against logic. Right? So I need to counter sometimes my predisposition to follow what logic says. I need to counter my predisposition to what my introvert says. If there's a problem, if there's a problem in a team, my tendency in the past was to identify the few people that where the problem lied and go talk with them one-on-one, and try to solve it one by one. When I was managing a team of 230 people in mobile devices, my team was 230 people, that didn't work. I couldn't go to the 30, 40 people one by one and have a one-to-one meeting with every single person. I had to learn how to scale. I had to learn how to change that. And that was a lot about my learning. So the skills I had to learn. I'll put this I put this one in, not for me, because since I was 5, I learned English. But this is one that I think a lot of Asians, I think, are held back on. Your ability, our ability to speak English clearly is a big impediment to our success. Leadership is 90% about communication. Leadership is 90% about communication. It's not what you decide, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And I spend most of my time, okay, I'm a director here. I write no code. All my influence and all my impact is around my ability to convince people what to do. And especially at Google, where Googles are very bottom-up driven. if a director comes and says, okay, we're going to do this, and you're going to do that, and you're going to do that, like, they'll all say, see ya, I'm leaving, right? So my ability to get anything done is based on my ability to communicate well. In America, sarcasm is a huge tool. Humor is a huge tool. But I call it sarcasm because in the Asian culture, in Chinese culture, sarcasm is not used as strongly. Not nearly as strongly as it is in America. Right? And you might already sense like some of the things I've said earlier already have sort of hinted toward my bias toward using sarcasm and using humor as a technique for how I relate to people. If you look around and if you talk to other people, talk to Americans who haven't really interacted with a lot of Asians, and you really pull the truth out of them, it's not surprising, but if they're interacting with someone who they have a hard time understanding, they will get frustrated. They will tend to take other avenues. They will tend to go to someone else who may have the equal knowledge and ability, maybe even slightly less, but who they can interact with, who they can communicate better with. So if we are not fluent, we have one strike against us already. At worst, so there's a book at the end that you can look at that I cite, but at worst, sometimes when we come in and speak with a heavy accent so we can't be understood, or we have a hard time being understood, that's actually equated with lack of intelligence. You could be the smartest person in the world, but for some people, if you go in there and you talk with them and they can't understand you, they cannot tell the difference between whether it's simply a language barrier or an intelligence issue. And that's a big strike against us. So as I said, so you learn the skills, you identify what you need to do, you become better at them. Now what do? You execute. You've got to go out and do it. When you have the opportunity to take and fall into your easier path, don't. Take the opportunity to go into the harder path. If, for example, you're in a table and you decide that, hey, I want to work on my understanding or my fluency, my pronunciation of English. I'm sitting on a table with a bunch of other people who we could all speak Mandarin. But if it is important to you to be able to communicate better, then you should be speaking English, even though it is easier to speak Mandarin. You should push yourself, take yourself out of the comfort zone, if that is your priority. I say this about leadership overall, and many people will equate this with management. But I say to you that it is even more important if you are not a manager, but you want to become an influential individual contributor. Because as a manager, you have the power of the management structure. You can write someone's review. And so you have the hammer where you have a captive audience and they must listen to you at some level. But if you're an individual engineer, you're an architect, you have to influence your peers, influence people outside of your group. And you have two levers for that. One is the merits of your technology, the merits of what you have to say, and two is how you say it. If you don't master this, and you're an individual contributor, you will have half the battle lost before you start. Right? And then I will say, so practice, put the energy in, and then the last two, courage and conviction. Have the courage to go out on a limb. Take some risks. I hated speaking in front of people, but I sucked it up and said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I just got up and just started doing it. Right? And I practiced and I practiced and I practiced. And I don't know what you think of me now, but I will tell you I am much better now than I was 10 years ago. Much, much better now than I was 10 years ago. So here's my predispositions. I recognize the challenges for me. And what do I do about them? I invested in learning how to present. I don't do it as often as someone who is an extrovert will, but I do it. and I support it with individual forums. I follow up on a one-on-one basis with key individuals. That's my style. So I take a skill that I need, I take the predisposition that I have, and I meld the two together. And that's how I found my way. I studied organizational systems. I knew that I had to understand how the organization, how people worked in an organization beyond just the logic of the technology. And so I studied it. I particularly studied this amazingly brilliant PhD doctor named Barry Oshry. And so I understood better about how people relate with each other, and I incorporated that more into how I led and how I managed teams. In making decisions, I used to drive just to what I thought was the right decision, and then we just execute and announce that and execute on it. When a review came in front and I saw problems, I would critique it. I would point out the problems. I still had the responsibility of pointing out the problems, but I always try to find a way to do it in a constructive way. Because people are coming to you with the best of their work. And they have reasons to believe what they believe. Even if you disagree, you have to start with the premise that they have some reason for believing it. And you need to support that. So before, when a review came through and I thought it was completely wrong, I would tear it apart. Now, when I come in and I completely disagree, I try to find why they believe what they believe, and I reinforce it. I agree with their premise, though I may disagree with the conclusion. I make a point to acknowledge and reiterate what their premise was and why I agree. In playing politics, this is one of the hardest ones that I've had to deal with. In an environment where you have to play politics and you can get hurt by not playing the politics, I decided not to play those games. And what I focused on was build great teams, build loyal teams, have them execute well, and have that support you, right? And so that is my method for battling that politics. I will say up front that it is not always successful. In a highly political environment where other people are really, really good at it, and they have highly functional teams, I will be at a disadvantage. But I accept that. That is something that, in order for me to hold true to my values, that maybe that environment is not the right thing for me. So even as I say this, I will then turn around and say, not every situation is winnable. The first thing that I learned that I have to do is I have to align my core values with the environment that I want to work in and that I want to succeed in. There are some environments where I cannot and will not succeed. I need to accept that. And I need to accept that when I reach that arena, then I need to move. Now, I will also say that it's not one environment for everything. So in the US, there's the American culture and American environment. And then there's Washington State. And then there's Seattle area. And then there's the West Side versus the East Side. You might be a West Sider, you might be East Sider, but they're all different, right? And they're subcultures. And at some level, they need to be harmonious, but they don't need to be the same. So when I was at Microsoft, I'll say that I was in Windows, and that had one environment and one culture and one values. And it more or less aligned with Microsoft. It had some disagreements. And when I was in mobile devices, it had very different values. It worked slightly different. And then there was Xbox, and it was very, very different. But they're different environments. But I was compatible with them at certain realms. As an individual contributor, what I saw was the environment of an individual contributor and a lead was very different than the environment and value set that I had when I was a general manager and I was working with the vice presidents and general managers. So even within the environment that you have, your values, the values of the environment can change. So if you dig down deep and you evaluate that the environment is not the right one for you, it doesn't mean that you have to give up and completely change jobs to another company. It means you need to find the environment, and in a large corporation, it changes from area to area. Just like the environment changes from city to city, to suburb within the US. Right? That's the first thing I'd say. Align your values, and then understand your skills and your predispositions. Understand the skills that you need to develop, and go after those, and put the energy into developing them. Think about the leaders that you know. Think about the Asians that you know. You all come from different companies, so I'll say, if I think about the ones I came from Microsoft, one in Google, our community, Gary Locke, if I think about those individuals, every single one that I can think of have the ability to speak in front of a crowd, have very good English, very strong command on communication. Those are a couple invariants that as a leader here to succeed, if you don't have that, you have a big strike against you. So invest in those. There are others that are situational. Like Gary Locke had to have certain skills for him to succeed over and above that. Executives at Boeing, at Microsoft, at Google, at Amazon, they all have to have different skills in addition to that. But the ability to communicate well in a leadership position is invariant. Promote your values, improve your skills, invest the energy. To back up some of the things I've said, and also a couple of things that have really helped me, here's this book is very interesting. It talks about the predispositions, what Asians tend toward and how to consider those. Presenting the Win to Win. This is a book given to me by Kai Fu when I talked to him about like, man, I am just horrible at presenting. How do you do it? And so he gave me this book, and it's excellent. I highly recommend that. Authentic Leadership is a book I read about how to lead by your values, how to understand the essence of who you are, and how it is very powerful to lead by those values. And then if you hadn't heard of Myers-Briggs, here's Myers-Briggs, how you spell it, and the website, which talks to you a little bit about that. So this, as I said before, this is about me. This is my experience. Not everyone's the same, but this is what I've found has been critical for me in developing my ability to lead teams. I hope that for you, some parts of it are relevant, and you can pick apart which ones relate to you and apply it to yourself as well. Any questions I can answer? Yes?
You mentioned your past background. You started as a development engineers, then you became a manager, group manager or something.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit how you changed from an engineer into a manager? Did you ask for the change, or your boss at that time pushed you into it, which you kind of reluctantly or even reject the idea? You say, no, I don't want to be a lead. I don't want to be a manager.
So the question is, how did I change from being an individual contributor engineer to go into a management role? Is this something I asked for, or was it something that it was recommended to me? For me, it was something that I ended up asking for. And it was something a little bit of a frustration where I was able to write a lot of code, but I was limited by how quickly my fingers could type. And I wanted to have a bigger impact. I wanted to affect more of the code. And the way that I saw to do that was to become a lead and have a few engineers who I could work with and I could help design for and own a larger area of the product. So it was my desire just to have a bigger impact on it. I did not realize the management side that would entail, how much that would change me. It was simply my desire to essentially write more code by utilizing the other people. So. Other questions? Yes?
Do you enjoy the technical side of the work better than being a manager, or the other way around? And if you enjoy the technical side of it better, and you enjoy being a manager less, would you consider being just writing a code? Despite the fact that you want to have a bigger influence.
So the question is,
why do you want to be a manager?
Sure. So the question is, do I enjoy the technical side better, or do I enjoy being a manager better? That's a tricky question to answer, because if I was just going for sheer fun, day to day, I would definitely just write code. I love writing code. I write code at home just for fun. But what I get more fulfillment from long term, if I look back and think what's most fulfilling for me, it's the ability, when I get a team to work together and to really execute well and to achieve a common purpose, at the end of the day, that's extremely fulfilling to me. right? And so that's the most fun long term, but is at the same time much more frustrating on a day-to-day basis because you're continually having to debug people, and there's just no debugger that I can hook up to someone and like dump their assembly and patch them. So it's much more frustrating that way, but it's much more fulfilling. Yes, question.
Earlier you were talking about, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay, so earlier you were talking about Asians versus Americans, and a lot of Asians being very introverted versus Americans generally speaking being very extroverted. So in your experience and from your personal observation, do you find that the Asian people who are in leadership positions tend to more or less present the Americans?
Wait, I missed the last sentence you said.
In your personal experience and from your observations, the Asians that you see in leadership positions, do you see that they tend to be American born or present as American?
I see. Whoa. So the question is, do the Asian leaders that I do see, do they tend to be American born or present as Americans? There are many that fall in that category. And I think that those who are American born or who grew up in America, they have some advantages as Asians but born in America that others won't have. For example, if you grew up here, then your English is probably a lot cleaner than someone who grew up, went to school, went to college, and only came over from China or Asia in the past 5, 6, 7 years and had not really been forced to speak cleanly all their life. So there are some differences there. However, I'll say that there are certainly exceptions that prove that it can be done. It can be done very, very well. So for example, Kai-Fu Lee, he was born in Taiwan. He grew up in Taiwan. He speaks impeccable English. He also speaks impeccable Chinese. He will give a speech and he will use, like if you, typical if you hear a speech, especially a technology computer speech in Chinese, you'll drop into English here and there. You hear a bunch of Chinese and then you hear a word in English here. Kai-Fu will speak the whole thing in Chinese. He will use the Chinese words for names, for technologies. He won't say Google, he will say Guga. Right? He will absolutely not speak English when speaking to a Chinese audience. Right? So you can ride both sides. However, this is just back to predispositions. If you were born and grew up in America, then you have the predisposition of speaking cleaner English. It doesn't mean that you can't do that someone else can't also achieve that. But it's just what are your predispositions? Yes.
So when you talk about
Sorry.
some of the hurdles you have to get over as an Asian to get become a successful leader in a certain country, what about some of the unique value traits as an Asian that help you get to where you are?
That's a great question. So, and this actually goes to one of my predispositions of I tend to focus in on things to fix the problems. But your question is, what are some predispositions that help us as Asians, right? That's really a great question. My view on a couple of things. One is that the typical Asian culture encourages people to be much more studious, to put in the diligence, to really go the extra yard, to work incredibly hard, right? To think about the long term. Those things are highly, highly valued. So I've run teams in China and teams in the U.S. and people, the engineers in China, they will wake up at incredibly late, early hours in the morning and stay very, very late in order to bend over backwards to accommodate the schedules of people in the U.S. Whereas if you went the other way around, I very rarely saw whole teams of people in America stay till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning to attend a conference call that's convenient to the engineers in China. There's a predisposition of dedication that's, I think, ingrained into a typical Asian value set that I think is incredibly valuable for us. The amount of study that we have, we spend a lot of time in book study, right? And that is a huge leverage for us. That also then creates not only the basis of knowledge, but also a work ethic that a lot of employers really, really value. I think that's a lot of the reasons why we are overrepresented at the individual engineering levels. Right? So I think that's a great predisposition for us. But we need to take it beyond that. Yes? Here.
So why do you think there's such a low number of higher up managers, Asian managers? Is it because they don't want managers, or is it because others perceive them as an introvert won't be good at?
So the question is, why do I think that there are so fewer up there? Is it because they don't, we don't want that, or is it something else? I do not think that the issue is that we don't want those positions. I don't think that it is. I think that there are the two things that I would bucket the issues into two parts. One is, I'll speak for myself. Some of the skills that I didn't have, or weren't predisposed for, were important skills for me to succeed. They were actually important. Like the ability to speak in front of a crowd is an important skill that I must have if I want to lead a group of 200 people, right? So I wasn't comfortable doing it. I wasn't good at doing that. That was a real problem for me, right? Now there are other ones where I think it's something that the environment does not appreciate, and you need to figure out how to deal with that. So I am not good at the real-time debate in the meeting, arguing head to head, going at it. So I am not good at that, but I can still contribute strongly in those environments. And the way I found to do that was I would consider a thing, and afterwards I would write up a very thoughtful evaluation, and I would send it to my manager, who then gave it credence, read it, and he was my champion. So we ended up being a great partner. I would feed him information, he would represent it, he would argue it, and he would give me credit for it. And so I was fortunate that I had a manager who valued something that a lot of other people did not value. And that's a problem with the environment that we need to figure out how to cope with. But then there are other parts which are skill sets that we need to learn. I don't think the issue is that Asians don't want management positions. I have a hard time believing that. Or at least I'll say that there are a lot more Asians who want those management positions than are currently in it. You had a question up here?
Yeah, you kind of answered it. I was trying to understand, how do you promote your values? We all have great values, but how do you do that?
How do I promote the values?
Yeah, especially as an individual contributor.
Until you said the as the individual contributor one, I was ready. What I find for me is that the vast majority of hard questions that come to me as a manager, as a leader, are actually answered by my values. And so the thing for me to do is take those opportunities to lead my answer with the values. So for example, just yesterday, an engineer on my team, he has, I think, 6 weeks of vacation queued up, or 5 weeks of vacation, a large number of vacation weeks queued up. And so he says, well, I'm forced to use them now and take a leave, but I really don't want to, because we're a critical stage of the product, I'm very passionate about it, and I don't really have anywhere to go for 5 weeks. So I said, the vacation is not something as a tax, and it's not fair to sort of put you at sort of a disadvantage and take you away from the thing that you love to do. The vacation thing is supposed to be something that helps you rejuvenate, and also it's something that we should be fair about. So because of that, you should tell me when you want to take your vacation that you think is fair for you and for the company. Give me your plan, and if I agree, then we'll do it. If it means that you're going to take some part of it now and you're going to roll over more than what the official rules allow, then I will go and make that happen. So what I did was I started off by saying the way that we should decide this is based on the principle of fairness. Now, given that, this is what I think we should do. And I do that for a lot of things. Like another one was, there's this battle. There's this battle about how much we should give, like how, when we decide about an issue about someone and say, okay, we're not going to promote this person, or we're going to give them a low score. There are sometimes some tricky information that you have about, do you really want to communicate this to this person? Do you really want to let them know all the feedback that happened, right? And that can be a really tricky thing. The position I say was, hey, I believe in transparency. If you don't tell this person, even if it's a hard message, if you don't tell them, then you aren't doing the best for them. Because I believe in transparency, we should be telling them these things, even though it's really hard, right? Even if that might mean that they leave the group, leave the company, we should do it. So whenever possible, I will state my value of how we should decide first, and then I will state what I think we should do. Yes?
Would you recommend community involvement as a great way to practice leadership?
Sorry?
Would you recommend community involvement as a great way to practice leadership, to learn and promote your values?
The question is, would I recommend community involvement as a way of practicing leadership? On the one hand, I would say yes, but on the other hand, I would say more of each of us needs to understand what works for us. For some people, community involvement, volunteering, it could be volunteering in your PTA, maybe that's the right thing. For other people, it's going to Toastmasters. But that's something that each of us needs to fit into what's comfortable for us, what will help us. And I think that's a very individual decision. Now, if community involvement is something that you're comfortable with and you're passionate about, then I do think it's actually quite a good way of doing it. If you actually work on the leadership part. Because you could become like Habitat for Humanity. You could go there and you could work and you could be a follower, in which case you are not learning a lot about leadership. But you could go there on a volunteer basis and lead, help decide, in which case you are learning. The great thing about community involvement from volunteerism is in that environment, everyone is there because they want to be there. They're not there because they need the salary. And so if you're going to lead them, it's going to be because they want to follow you. Right? So that's the powerful thing about volunteer and community involvement. If you're able to lead in that environment where no one is beholden to you, they have no motivation to follow you other than that they want to, then that's great. Yes?
First, I'm trying to tell you the screensaver is
Oh.
distracting your message.
Sorry, those are my Africa pictures.
So my question is, you always pick the Indian group outside Asian when you post statistics. Especially when I observe a lot of Indian people rise really high in IBM, in all big companies, they tend to be more represented in the VP level. So do you have some observation about why that happens?
I do. So the question is, the Indian population tends to be more highly represented in the executive levels than Asian, than Chinese, and sort of Chinese descent, all grouped together. I recognize that, and which is why in some of the slides I pull them out. I think that there are a few differences that really separate Indian from the rest of Asia in this regard. One is that India was a British colony, right? English is the official language of India. So from a communication point of view, they have a predisposition that Chinese people, for example, don't. Also, if you understand the culture more, there's more sort of assertiveness in that culture than there is in a lot of Asian cultures. And those are the two things that I think, for me, were big challenges that I see either for myself or for friends that I have. And so for that reason, I think that Indian population is more highly represented. And I think it actually is a proof point for a lot of what I believe.
Do those Indians speak good English?
Oh, well, you should think to the executives that you know of who are of Indian descent. The ones, by and large, the ones that I know speak very good English. Yes.
When you talk about values, and mainly Asian values like Chinese values, I can see these values helping us get to, say, a middle management level. But at the same time, I see those values sort of hindering us in the higher levels. And as an example, if you take a look at, I come from GE, and GE adopts a lot of different groups, a lot of people from different groups, from a practical sense, and yet their core leadership, their high leadership, tends to be more, I guess, European-based. Whereas if you take a look at a lot of Asian companies, we tend not to have diversity. And in some ways it's due to that teamwork. As you look your own career, I mean, do you think that you'll have difficulty moving to the upper echelons if you still keep those values?
So the question is, your statement is that a lot of what I talked about will help get to middle management. But will that cause us to get to the top executives, the CEOs, even the vice president, senior vice president levels? I'll respond a couple ways. And then the following question is, won't we really have to, in the end, change our core values in order to get to that next level or not? So I'll state a couple things. One is, whether or not you have to change your core values or not, which I don't think that you should, and I don't think you have to, I will still assert that in order to get to those upper levels, you still have to become good at some of these things, right? These are a qualifier. These won't propel you there necessarily, but I assert to you that these are hindrances that if you don't master them, they will hinder you. They won't necessarily discount, right? Because like you can always overcome with other stronger things, but they will hinder if we don't master the ability to communicate well, right? So it's important to at least qualify to get in the game. These things need to happen. Will you need to change your values in order to get to the top levels? I don't believe so, and I believe that I have a core belief that in the end, if you compromise the core of who you are, then you will always be fighting yourself. And one who fights themselves and is not true themselves, you can't really execute well in the end if you're not true to yourself. So you will have to. And if I look at a lot of the executives that I know and who are at the top levels and who I have high respect for, the thing I will tell you is they lead by their values, and they lead by very, very good values, ones that I share, ones that I believe in. And the places where I think that there are the bigger gaps are around additional skill levels. If I look at in Google, I look at some of the top executives that I respect here at Google. I look at myself in comparison to those people. There are very clear skill sets that I aspire to learn and to master that do not compromise my value set. What I would recommend to you is the book Authentic Leadership. And that book talks about how leading by strong values and aligning those to your environment actually becomes a huge benefit for you to get to the higher levels. And that was done by, written by the CEO of Medtronics. Yes?
You have made effort in improving your communication skill and your skill in public speaking. Would you share some of your experience and how you have done it with us?
Sure. So the question is, how did I go about improving my skills in public speaking? The answer is really, for me, very simple. Two things. One is I read the Presenting to Win book, and I really took it to heart. I sat and I really thought about it. I really internalized it. And then the second thing was I just practiced. I made myself get up in front, even though I could decline. I'm not comfortable doing it. I don't really want to do it. I just threw myself in there and just practiced. And I asked for feedback, and then I listened to feedback, and I iterated. So just two things. One is get someone to help. So I reached out to one person. They gave me the book. I read it. I loved it. and I just did it. I practiced. Yes?
Earlier you did a survey as to when did we come to the U.S., and the majority of us came like during college and stuff like that.
Yes.
And at college, you probably can't speak perfect English, so are we screwed, or are there I mean, if so, are there ways that you can help us say that? How do we improve and get rid of our accents? And if not, another question is, as the world becoming more globalized, does accent become a disadvantage? Because I've seen firms where there are a lot of international people that they actually are a disadvantage.
So two questions, two-part question. One is, if you came into the U.S. after you were past puberty, are you screwed? And the second is, as the world becomes more international, does it really not matter, or does the difference actually become an advantage? On the first one, I'll say you're not screwed. The studies have shown that it's much harder to learn a language when you're past puberty, right? So if you're trying to learn English for the first time and you're past puberty, you might have a hard time unless you're predisposed to have the ability to pick up languages. However, there have been no studies that have shown that articulation is something that you stop doing at puberty. To be able to pronounce certain letters is not something that you lose at puberty, but you need to put the effort in. The studies have only shown that the parts that learn grammar, that learn the phraseology, that part changes at puberty. So I do not believe at all that you're screwed. I believe that it just takes effort. Now, the second thing as we become more international, will this all not matter? And I don't know. And maybe 20, 30, 40 years from now, it won't matter. But I believe that for the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, it will matter. But let's face it, America is a very sort of America-centric country, right? Americans believe that the world kind of spins around America. Just like China. So what will cause it to change? I think that the mixing of the worlds will eventually happen. I hope it will eventually happen. But I don't think that it will happen in the next decade. It's my personal opinion. Yes?
Well, my question is to follow up to the previous question, but not you, because you already speak very good English. to the other gentleman, this question about when you move up toward the corporate management later, my observation is that the higher you move up, the more technical skill you have to give up, or you get less and less involvement. But instead, you get involved with more and more financial management, company acquisitions, or you get into more involvement with personal issues. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes a totally different ball game. You have to play politics. And in a sense, it's in a lot of sense, it's all about numbers. Everything becomes more quantifiable in terms of numbers. So that's my observation in the line of business I'm in. But I'm wondering whether you also see that in your career path, or if in the future, if you want to move up to a higher level within Google, do you see the same trend as well?
So the question is, as you go up the ladder, do you need to give up the technical side? And as you said, in your environments, you potentially have to. Is your observation that you potentially have to give up the technical side and become more management, more in the numbers, more business oriented? So I'll say that I found that was largely true for certain things. As a dev manager, I was actually writing a lot of code. I wrote more code than the average dev manager did. So for me, that part wasn't true until I became product unit manager. And I switched from a pure technical discipline to one that manages the business. And that was a choice that I made. At Google, my role here as an engineering director is much, much, much more technical than it was when I was a general manager at Microsoft. So I chose to go into a more technical role and follow a company. Like Google, we have engineering that goes all the way up to the CEO. So the engineering goes, the top manager for engineering is a developer engineer reporting to the CEO. So that's how this company works, and it's something that I chose because I valued that. So it certainly is true for many corporations. It is not true for all, and each of us has to make a choice as to what we value. Yes.
So from what you say, I think there's two takeaways. One is when you try to move up, you really have to rely on your strengths, right? And at the same time, you try to cover up your weakness, you improve. Another way you can see is you have to find a suitable environment, because like financial company, it's a different ballgame, and like insurance company, financial company, versus a web-based, technical company.
Right. So the comment is you need to find an environment that is suitable, matches yours, and you need to address your weaknesses. Right? And in the core, that is a message, and that's kind of the obvious one of, hey, find an environment that is compatible with you, find out what your weaknesses are, and work on them. And that's always the recipe for how you should go up the ladder. So I agree with that. But my message to you is, as Asians, we have a certain set of predispositions that I did not really think about, internalize, until I went through this one class. And then I saw, okay, it's not just me, but there's this code that I was born with or that I grew up with in my family that causes me to behave one way. And my goal here is to bring your attention to those specific ones as important ones for us to address.
So as a leader, how do you define what is a success for your team or for whatever business?
So the question is, for a team, for me, how do I, as a leader, define what success is? I have my metrics of what I think the team should accomplish. And in the end of the day, for me, if I believe that the team works together really well and executes efficiently, then I believe in success. So as I talk to my direct reports, one of the things I harp on is, even though we're an engineering team, our number one job is to build a great team. Our number one job is not to build a great product. Our job is to build a great team. A great team will build a great product. Right? No one else other than me and my direct reports can build the team. The engineers, the line engineers, they can build the product. It's our job to build the team. So my value of teamwork, I lead by that. Our job is to build a great team. And if we build a high-functioning team that enjoys working together, that is efficient, that cooperates well with each other, then that's my number one metric that we have succeeded. And then I think byproducts will be lots of great products.
How did you survive in an environment that are very hardcore on those numbers, the KPIs to meet, like Microsoft?
And the question, so how do I survive in these? Well, I'll say that when I was a dev manager, I didn't recognize and believe that, and so I drove hard to just create the great product. And I'll say that in Pocket PC 2002, this is one of the projects that was a very hard project, and we got out the door. But at the end of that project, we had a large amount of attrition. It was my fault because I drove the team very, very hard. I didn't build a good team, and so I had a hard time building a great product. In 2003, I had a hard time building a great product. And that was a wake-up call to me that says, long term, if you want to build a great product, if you want to win on all those other metrics, you can't focus on that. You need to focus on the engine that does that, right? So I had a rude awakening around the year 2002 and 2003 when I drove an engineering team to the ground and had about 30% attrition after the release. Yes?
I'm not sure if this question is relevant to today's topic. I just want to know more about development model in Google comparing with Microsoft.
So the question is about development model in Google versus Microsoft. I think that is a topic for another time. There are some interesting differences. There are some interesting differences between the two, but I think that's beyond the scope of what we should talk about today. Yes.
I'm kind of interested to know, how do those American kids learn how to play politics so well?
High school. It's all high school.
You know, there's a lot of truth to that, and there's an article I was reading the other day. How do American kids learn how to play politics well? What is recognized and valued in a Chinese culture for students? People who study hard, get good grades. What's recognized well and valued in American culture? Who's the class president? Who's on the student council, right? So you're trained early to go through these different things, right? So I think there's a lot to do with the upbringing. Is it nurture? Is it nature? It might be both. But my theory, and what I believe in, what some of the literature that I've read, centers around the education system that's backed by our values, right? We value IQ in a lot of Asian cultures. We value studying. We value high grades, right? In American culture, we value popularity, right? It's values. It's values. Other questions? Yes.
Question of Pete. What do you think about getting an MBA and going into the business side of leadership versus going through the dev manager or that kind of tech leadership?
So what do I think about going to an MBA and going that route of management leadership versus going technical and going that route? That will depend on you as an individual and how you learn. As for me, I'm not a good student. I don't think that going for classes would be the right path for me. But sort of on the job was something that worked for me. So I think that's a very personal question. But in any case, whichever route you go, if you end up going to lead and have a team to lead, I'll say that I think no matter what route you go, you have to be a good communicator, right? You have to be able to get your point across well. It's not what you say, but it's how you say it, right? Okay? Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming.